From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Well, the Republicans are at it again. This time, the right to protest. You know how Republicans, they get together, and somehow, through this weird magic, every state legislature in the country has got the same agenda. They really know how to work together. Right now, it's limiting rights to protest. In the wake of protests following the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, across the country, I'm reading from newsandguts.com right now. Across the country, Republican-led legislatures are pursuing laws that target unlawful protest. Proposed punishments run the gamut from losing student loan assistance to being banned from public office. Some states are decriminalizing vehicular assault if it's aimed at a demonstrator. Despite GOP claims to the contrary, a Harvard professor specializing in human rights studied Black Lives Matter's protests and found that 96.3% of events involved no property damage or police injuries, and in 97.7% of events, no injuries were reported among participants, bystanders, or police. We've been hammering this point from the beginning here on The Log. And what this doesn't even point out, in those cases, the 2.3% of cases where there were injuries, in the less than 4% of events where there was property damage, the great percentage of those, nearly 100%, were not caused by the protesters themselves. As we've gone over and over and over, and as the mainstream press refuses to emphasize, they might give it a mention occasionally, but they don't emphasize this point, that the great majority of violence and property damage came from outside agitators, provocateurs, right-wing militia-type, white nationalist-type troublemakers who want violence. They attack police. They create property damage just for the sake of creating chaos because that's what they want. Because they're crazy and they want civil war. They want a race war. They want this all to come to a head. So they took advantage of the situation and under the cover of these protests caused trouble. So the protesters who are actually I'm sorry, I forgot the most important thing. Violence is nearly always incited by the police themselves. So outside agitators, police-induced violence, the protesters themselves in this 2, 3, 4% of troubling events are innocent bystanders. They're the victims. So these Republican so-called solutions to violent protests is nothing more than a cynical ploy to rob people of their free speech. And not just any people, to rob the so-called left, or what they perceive as the left. It's really a great swath of Americans who sympathize with the cause, with Black Lives Matter generally. We all saw the numbers. Right after the George Floyd murder and the ensuing protests, polls showed huge support across the country. But then a few violent incidents and this kind of spin from the right wing, blaming the protesters themselves, which was never true, then the numbers did slip a little bit, but still there's support. So now GOP lawmakers across the country are targeting protesters with these new proposed laws. Some of them more proposed, some of them passed already. Earlier this week, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican, signed what he called the strongest anti-rioting pro-law enforcement piece of legislation in the country. The law, which went into effect immediately, grants civil legal immunity to people who drive through protesters blocking a road, which Democrats argued might have protected the white nationalist who ran over and killed counter-protester Heather Heyer during the Charlottesville tumult in 2017. It also makes blocking a highway a felony offense, according to the Orlando Sentinel. In a statement, Florida State Senator Chevron Jones said this legislation undermines every Floridian's constitutional rights, and it is disgusting that the GOP would rather empower vigilantes and silence voices that listen to the majority of Floridians who oppose this dangerous bill. The Republicans, well, and this goes to a bigger problem we've discussed many times. There's no such thing as democracy. The Republican Party has absolutely no interest in representing the people of their states or the people of the country. They routinely pass bills that are wildly unpopular. They routinely ignore legislation, top of the line being gun safety laws that get popular support up in the 90%. So that's something we've talked about many times. Take a second here also to let you know, protesting, we've gotten the wrong idea about peaceful protesting. Let's just take a step back and check ourselves on what we believe about protesting. Yes, I believe in nonviolent protesting, in the model of Martin Luther King, Gandhi, the classic model of nonviolence. Yes, I do believe in that. Here's where the mistake has been made. Gandhi or Martin Luther King or anybody else never said you have to be passive about it. No, civil disobedience is a thing. And something like blocking a highway, disrupting normal business. No, it's not about being polite and staying in your little zone. If the powers that be are nice enough, accommodating enough to give you a little protest zone, then you just stay very passively on that little sidewalk they've designated for you, and you carry your little signs. Don't yell too loud. No, it was never about that. Never, ever. Don't let anybody tell you that it was. Peaceful protest means disrupting. It includes civil disobedience, ignoring the orders of police who are telling you to disperse, blocking highways and roads, disrupting normal business, occupying buildings. That's all part of it, and Dr. King never said otherwise. So don't let anybody fool you into thinking that nonviolence means passive, means timid. No. You go where you're not supposed to go. You break the law. Yes, that's what civil disobedience means. Disruption, civil disobedience? Yes, absolutely. So that's the truth of the matter, and I'm making no apology for it, and neither should you. And these draconian laws have one purpose, and that is to silence political speech. There are already laws about disrupting government business or private business. There are already laws about blocking traffic, about assembling unlawfully. Those laws are already on the books. You don't have to write these sort of super laws that make them especially draconian, turn them into felonies, increase the penalties. No, they're already laws. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of civil disobedience, to break laws. And then when you do break the law, depending on how you want to handle it, you just sort of lay yourself down in the fetal position and make the cops carry you away. Or you quietly put your hands behind your back and they cuff you and they take you and they book you and then you're bailed out, and that's it. That's how it works. And you do it in front of the cameras. Do we need a lesson again in how basic protesting is supposed to work? That's just how it works. And these laws are not legitimate. They are the laws of an oppressive state. And now, like they do, the Republican Party, in lockstep, in lock goose step, are all over the country. Republican legislators in Oklahoma and Iowa have passed bills granting immunity to drivers whose vehicles strike and injure protesters in public streets. A Republican proposal in Indiana would bar anyone convicted of unlawful assembly from holding state employment, including elected office. A Minnesota bill would prohibit those convicted of unlawful protesting from receiving student loans, unemployment benefits, or housing assistance. Again, I'm reading here from newsandguts.com. Human Rights Watch, which generally focuses on horrors overseas, criticized the spate of anti-protest bills. They said this: international human rights law protects the right of peaceful assembly and requires authorities at all levels to facilitate such assemblies and avoid unnecessary or disproportionate restrictions on them. The mere act of planning or participating in a protest should not be criminalized. Authorities are also required to protect people participating in such assemblies. Yeah, we tend to forget that. That's the job of authorities, to protect those participating in such assemblies. Bills that encourage or allow violence against protesters are inconsistent with those obligations, and states should abandon them. They violate international standards of human rights. You guys, this can't be repeated enough. The Republican Party is no longer a legitimate political party in this country. They must be destroyed. The Republican Party is, as Noam Chomsky has stated over and over again, the most dangerous entity on this planet right now. You might think that sounds like hyperbole. It is anything but. It is exactly the truth. You know, for all their rhetoric about liberty and about individual rights, how long is it going to take for everybody to see that they practice exactly the opposite? The right to protest, the right to vote. All over the country, again, in this coordinated effort. I mean, the entire history of this country, in the best possible light, it's the expansion of individual rights, of individual liberty. Liberty is their favorite word. Individual rights is their favorite concept. And it's the biggest lie of all. They are taking that Goebbels notion of the big lie to its fullest extent on several different fronts. They've got the big lie of the 2020 election, that Joe Biden stole it. They've got the big lie of Democrats in general, that they're all wild-eyed communists who are going to take away all of your freedoms. And then this big lie that they believe in those freedoms in the first place. They're taking away your right to vote. They're taking away your right to protest. They're taking away women's reproductive rights. They're taking away workers' rights to organize. At least they're attempting all of these things. And then you get into the area of regulation. What is environmental regulation except an individual's right to clean air, to clean water? Regulations are rights. Does a kid in Flint, Michigan have a right to clean water out of the tap? Yes, absolutely. That kid does have that right. To constantly be harping on and passing legislation about reduced regulation, that's just a backhanded way of taking away people's rights. You have the right to live in a world that's not galloping toward an irreversible climate crisis. For a party that claims liberty and individual freedom, well, they sure do like to limit individual rights and freedoms. That's all they're about. Oh, speaking of the big lie, let's change course a little bit, but in a very related topic. The other big lie, again, there are several fronts. There are several big lies. One of them is best personified by Tucker Carlson of Fox News. Of course, he's not alone, but he is kind of an excellent poster child for this. And that's his recent obsession with replacement theory. You know, the chant from the Charlottesville torch bearers, Jews will not replace us, Jews will not replace us. It's ugly, it's KKK, it's, it's right out there in its full, vile ugliness. Well, Tucker Carlson and others are being quite open about it these days. It's why they're so anti-immigrant. They talk about saving our heritage. It's very thinly veiled, if veiled at all. This existential fear they have that the American white race, so-called, will be replaced by black folks, by immigrants, by Hispanics. and that we, that is, Americans, have every right to pursue every avenue through legislation, through the curbing of the kind of rights I was talking about, through anti-immigration, through any sort of labor laws or laws regarding police and the carceral state, whatever means necessary to subdue the cultural and mostly the political power of anybody who's not white. And they cloak this in the language of heritage and history. And this whole disgusting notion has even sort of had a tangential relationship with the Derek Chauvin verdict in the murder of George Floyd. Because upholding the police state as it currently exists, that is, as a buffer against groups other than well-heeled white folks, to gain any foothold in cultural or political power. Anything that threatens that police force, that police state, of course, is to be resisted. So it was almost shocking, and of course, I don't know why we should be shocked anymore, but still we are. The reaction to the Chauvin verdict from the right-wing media sphere about how he really wasn't guilty of murder, that this verdict only came out of fear that there would be rebellion, there would be violence in the street. So the jury only came to its verdict because it was scared of the violence that would ensue if they acquitted. They're saying these kinds of things right out loud, and it absolutely dovetails beautifully with their fear of so-called replacement. They are absolutely dedicated to, devoted to, clinging to a patriarchal, white supremacist power structure that upholds their privilege and blatantly denies the rights, openly, blatantly blocks the progress, the rights of other communities. That's just who they are. Once again, not a legitimate party, not a legitimate movement. They are just the most recent incarnation of the very worst humanity has to offer. Xenophobes, racists, nationalists, fascists. Some of the right-wingers, again, media and politicians, are taking a slightly different approach. They're offering up Derek Chauvin as a sacrificial lamb. They're calling him an outlier, a bad apple. They're condemning him. They're saying, yes, this absolutely was murder. Shame on this guy. And isn't it great how we shed crocodile tears for George Floyd, and we throw Derek Chauvin under a bus and into solitary for the rest of his life? They're just offering him up. Okay. And then we'll say, yeah, he's an outlier. Don't dare to extrapolate at all. He's not part of any system. There's no such thing as systemic racism. I heard it again just this weekend. Lindsey Graham said it on one of the Sunday shows. Systemic racism doesn't exist. That's their claim. I don't know whether they believe it or not. There's another small division among the right-wingers. I'm not quite sure. Can't always tell when they're being just cynical opportunists, when they're just lying through their teeth, or some of them are actually true believers. It doesn't matter. That's another sidebar that maybe doesn't matter so much. Whether they're true believers or they're just lying through their teeth, the results are the same. The results of their proposed policies are the same. So there it is, yet another front, another battle line on which we have to amass our forces. We have to be aware of this. I'm not telling you anything new. I hope you're aware of the whole replacement theory lie. Well, and you know what? Here's the thing that we have to be clear about. In a great respect, it's not a lie. As a matter of fact, the concentrated and exclusive power of the white supremacist patriarchy is being threatened. So they're right about that. What they're wrong about is that it should be resisted. The United States of America, let's just be frank about it, is the creation of a European invasion of native peoples. It was built by enslaved peoples, and it was populated by further immigration. So the fact that a couple of boatfuls of white Europeans kind of got things going, lit the original match, if you will. They did start the fire that's been burning since the world's been turning. So just the fact that some folks from England came over on the Mayflower, that's our justification for feeling that the white supremacist patriarchy has some sort of institutional, unending right to hold the reins of power? Can't go with you there. But factually, you are right. Yes, people of color, non-whites as you recognize them, through marriage, through childbirth, through immigration, through all of the natural demographics that happen in a country, there is a replacement happening. There's nothing planned about it. There's nothing nefarious about it. There's nothing you can do about it. It's just demographics. It's just nature. It's just people living their lives. And the idea that you could artificially prop up this sort of manufactured race of people, this myth of the white supremacist patriarchy, well, yeah, I guess you accurately do, Tucker Carlson and the rest of you. You do see the writing on the wall. You do see that those days are numbered. What's different between you and me, Tucker Carlson, is that I'm fine with it. I'm happy with it. I am happy to not be a part of this unnatural, oppressive ruling class, ruling race that you feel is necessary. And I would ask you, now I'm talking to you, listening at home or in your car or on your treadmill. I'm talking to you now, the listener. And this is worth some personal examination here, because I really don't want any of us to be unwitting allies to Tucker Carlson. And I'm going to say something painful here that you don't want to hear. I think Tucker Carlson has way more allies than we realize, including folks who think they are modern, contemporary, liberal, progressive, lefties. If you prefer living in a world where your white skin gives you privilege, if you consider yourself a good person, unbiased, anti-racist even, but then you look around and you realize, and this isn't everybody, but this is a lot of people. You look around, you realize, well, okay, my neighborhood isn't really very diverse. My workplace isn't very diverse. Lots and lots of white folks still live in exclusively white or predominantly white neighborhoods, and they work in predominantly white workplaces. And where there is diversity, by and large, not 100%, even where there is diversity, the white male is still usually the boss. You might have some diversity in your social circle, but there are still majorities and minorities, and you might not be too aware of it. You might not give it a thought. So my uncomfortable reminder here is, are you comfortable in your white supremacist world? And in a certain way, are you contributing to that? In other words, well, I chose this particular suburb because, it's safe. Kind of a code word. The schools has good schools. It has open space and parks, and I can afford to get a house with a nice yard for my kids. These might all seem like perfectly legitimate reasons, but of course you have to close your eyes to how these conditions came to be. Why is it this very nice, comfortable little neighborhood that I live in is so predominantly white? And the little bit of diversity is, we're happy with that. That makes us, as liberals, make us kind of feel good about ourselves. So just a warning. I'm not making any big accusations here. I'm just asking everybody, myself included, let's sort of check our privilege. How did we get where we are? What decisions did we make about where we live and where we work? And are we or are we not contributing to Tucker Carlson's vision of white supremacy, even if we're doing it unwittingly, and even if we can rationalize? And to bring it back to current headlines, what do you really think about Derek Chauvin? I think the sentiment is nearly universal among normal, right-thinking people. Right now I'm excluding the right-wingers, the more blatant racists, the unapologetic police apologists. No, I'm talking about just regular, run-of-the-mill, good, generally liberal people. I think an awful lot of folks have taken comfort in the guilty, guilty, guilty verdicts. I think for an awful lot of white folks, it takes the pressure off. I don't have to get up every day and worry about, think about the great, awful built-in injustice of policing generally. I can tell myself, oh, the system worked. Or even more to the extreme, the system works, suggesting that it will work in the future, that we don't need big reform, we don't need to defund the police or reimagine the police or abolish the police. No, that's for the radicals. I think this great horde of moderate, centrist, salt-of-the-earth white folks, many are thinking, well, this is a great step in the right direction, and our hearts are in the right places, and it turns out the system works after all, and we'll improve from this point forward. And we can tinker around the edges, and we can trust our legislators to do the right thing, maybe even pass the George Floyd police reform bill that's going through Congress right now. Thank God we don't have to be revolutionary. This shows that the middle ground works, that the status quo is all we need. Yeah, that wasn't really policing. No police officers would condone such actions as Chauvin took. He's a bad apple. Yeah, this is my fear. My fear is that the great sort of middle in this country will take the opportunity to justify the non-committal middle. Oh, I can breathe again. I can just go back to my life. I can go to my job. I can mow my lawn. The current power structure seems to work. Let's let it do its thing. But by taking this attitude, the great middle, the great non-committal middle, turns its back on the work that needs to be done, on the protests that still need to be conducted, on the reform that needs to happen, on the white supremacist patriarchy that needs to be destroyed. So this great moment in history, for too many people, it's just over now. Well, it was just another TV show. It was the O.J. verdict. It was the crowning of a new American Idol. It all just falls into the same boat. And then we go on with our lives, not for a minute questioning the deep institutional injustices that made the Chauvin trial necessary in the first place. Ignoring the racist response from Tucker Carlson, from state legislators criminalizing protest. I'm very concerned today about the great non-committal middle. Very concerned. Because the fascists in the national media, the fascists in the halls of Congress, they have such an outsized power. And believe me, they are wielding it. They are skillfully wielding their power every day. And it is no time to get comfortable. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.